that's one of the things that has to go. You know, the entitlements of the mind instead of entitlements of rights. You know, healthcare, you know, is something that we should spend some money on. It's actually a great prophylactic of further expense. And it's, for a lot of people, the right and decent thing to do. Why not have a safety net for very old people or very poor people? That makes sense. But the entitlement doctors have is an entitlement of greed. And it's something that nobody ever wants to address head on because it's very uncomfortable. People in the 60s and 70s, when you said, who are the richest people in town? They're the doctors. And today it's different. It's the entrepreneurs, it's the Wall Streeters, et cetera. But doctors are still a surefire way to get rich. And I think that it's time that we sort of crack the whip, because if we don't do that, you know, we're going to have expenses and deficits that run us into bankruptcy, because we're paying for Medicare and Medicaid, and the payments are going to physicians. And I think physicians are an artificially created market where the AMA says you cannot get an AMA accredited medical school built. There's only a few dozen medical schools. They graduate a very small amount of doctors. Being a doctor is hard, but it is something you want really talented people in. But with AI and other tools, becoming a doctor has never been easier. And being a doctor has never been easier. A lot of that work is done by nurse practitioners, physician's assistants.
My brother's a doctor. I was pre-med, and I was going to go to med school, but it's just so much work. Like, especially when I was applying, it's like at some point you're like, you basically have to walk in water to get into med school. And when I was doing, I also some of the doctors that I was doing research with were also on admissions boards for UCSD Medical School, and I talked to them about a lot of things, and they said that they had so many applicants that were qualified that it was like, sometimes the difference between, who got accepted and who didn't get accepted would be so minuscule in terms of GPA or MCAT score or whatever, because they just had so many qualified applicants. But it's exactly what you said, because the AMA, that's the American Medical Association, for those who don't know acronyms, is so stringent with their accreditation requirements for medical school and limits the amount of doctors. That's also why we've been known for, brain drain from taking doctors from other countries, because we do not produce enough of them, and that is by design.
What does this sound like? If you're a doctor, you got to pay dues to the AMA. Then the AMA goes to Congress and says, we'll give you guys some money, but you got to protect our back and make sure that you give us the sole right to appoint who is a doctor and who isn't. And the senator, with a bunch of money in their hands, they're counting the bills and they're saying, that's fine by me. And in the meantime, they go to Medicare and Medicaid and say, why does this stuff cost so much? And it's, well, what do you think? You're taking dollars from doctors who are huge donors. And those doctors are huge donors because they're rich. And they're rich because you make sure that there aren't too many doctors out there. And we know from supply and demand, when you cut the supply of something, the price goes up. And the price for doctors is a price like anything else. And it is a skill that people can learn. In fact, I mean, obviously we choose very smart people as physicians, but like you said, there's a lot of qualified people that can't go to med school that would love to go to med school. And, there's a lot of ways to either simplify medical school or do other things that allow us to spend money less. And there's pharma costs we can cut. I'm pro our pharmaceutical innovation. I think it's something we should be proud of, that we cured cystic fibrosis. We functionally cured HIV. We extended cancer life by a huge amount. There's all Americans doing this and American companies. We should be really proud of that. But it's not all peaches and cream in pharmaceuticals. And I know where there's a lot of areas of waste. For example, in certain generics, there's a lot of difficulty making a generic drug that's actually bioequivalent and replaceable. And I used to abuse the heck out of those regulations, and because they're on the books and they're legal. And I would abuse them for my own benefit as a business person, for my company's benefit. And I'd look at the law book and I say, well, it doesn't stop me from doing that. It doesn't stop me from doing that. And I know how to close those loopholes. But also, when it's important for our country, we're spending, $100 billion or more in medicine. We need to sort of think about, is all of that money being spent correctly? And I think that we still need to have incentives for drug companies to make medicines, to make cures. But we also have to think about, should a company have a 30-year monopoly on a drug? The patent life is generally 10 or 15 years, but there are some situations where companies can sneakily get, a 20, 30-year monopoly. And we have to ask, is that the rule we want? Sometimes that might make sense, sometimes it might not, but we have to at least think about it. And we also have hospitals. Hospitals have very interesting systems where they basically have to pay for care. Anybody that visits a hospital has to get health care. And because of that, hospitals have almost no margin. 20-30% of all hospital bills never get paid. It's a tough business to be in if that was your business. If 30% roughly of HCA's bills never get paid, it's hard to stay in business. Now, it's also very unethical to have somebody dying in your emergency room and not treat them. So how do you balance that? It's hard. And I think that if somebody wants to take a hard look at it and really think about it, somebody smart that can actually go in there and think about it really hard, as opposed to the senators that we have that are kind of golf, what are they, country club kind of people that just, they're not very smart and they don't really care. They just are very good at being politicians. Very few people actually want to go solve these challenges and think hard about them, because there's a lot of people in the way. And even if I were to get 1,000 or 2,000 petitions, and even if I were to get into Congress, I would not be very welcome. And I think that is one of the small good things that Trump did. Well, he did a lot of good things, to be fair, but one of the better things that he did, I think, was make people uncomfortable. To make these people ask, wait, is this the end of our gravy train? Is it over for me being a politician and living off the land here? Is this the end of my theft of American resources? And I think that is something that he did really well. But it's very hard. There's not a lot of solutions, and I think that one of the best solutions is getting out of the way and lowering our cost structure of our government and lowering kind of the things that we do, so that the greatness of our country can come out, and people, instead of working in bureaucracies, working at big offices in DC that do nothing, big offices in New York and other cities where the government has sprawled out, and government as a percentage of GDP is way too high. And again, I sympathize with Vivek when he says he's going to fire every government employee that has an odd security number or an even security number. I'll just flip a coin on the days of his presidency. I love that idea. It forces government, when companies do it, it forces them to do more with less. And that's exactly what we have to do with $17 trillion of debt. It would not be hard for us to go bankrupt. And again, the idea is preposterous. We're the reserve currency. We're this, we're that. Listen, I've heard it all before. And for 400 years, many empires have toppled. And a little bit of being careful goes a long way. And I'm not saying that we should necessarily use a term called austerity. We should not necessarily plummet into austerity and strictly stop, our country's spending and stop everything. That's not, necessarily what we have to do today or tomorrow. But somebody out there has to be talking about this and thinking about it and saying, hold on, is this sane? I gave the impression of using my brother Mark, but you can use your family name member or Nora or whatever. And I said, well, imagine you have this sibling or spouse or whatever. And in my case, his name is Mark. And you visit in with Mark. You haven't seen Mark in a while. So how are you doing, Mark? Catch me up on everything. He says, well, I'm making $30,000 a year. Okay. Well, what are you spending? Oh, I'm spending $40,000 a year. Okay, so you're losing $10,000 a year. Gee, what's going on? And you raise your eyebrow and you say, that doesn't sound right. And he says, oh, it's no big deal. I just go into debt every year. You raise your eyebrow even higher and you say, what the heck? That doesn't sound right. Who's lending you all this money? He said, don't worry, the bank's lending me a bunch of money. And you ask the question on your mind is, how much have they lent you? And he says, I'm in debt $170,000. And your jaw drops and you say, you're making $30K, you're spending $40K, you don't seem to care, and you're up to $170K in debt. What's going to happen? And that's exactly the numbers of our U.S. government. And you would be shocked at the insanity of a person doing that. But we're all blasé about the government doing that. And I think that the government and a person are not the same, and it's a little bit different. But at the end of the day, it does show you the dysfunction and insanity of DC. And there are countries, somebody's saying, oh, well, these kinds of economics don't work for government. The analogies don't work. They do. There are countries that have surpluses. Norway, Singapore, they have things called sovereign wealth funds. We can't even dream of a sovereign wealth fund. We have so much debt. We are so in debt that there's no wealth to manage. It's all debt. Why can't we have a sovereign wealth fund of huge amounts of surpluses for all the goods we make, from all the great stuff we have? And instead, we've got just debt, mountains of debt. And what happens when you build mountains and mountains of debt? Anyone in finance will tell you And anyone with a shred of common sense will tell you, you go broke. Warren Buffett said, the only thing that results in the destruction of financial institutions is leverage, borrowing more than you have. It killed Lehman Brothers. It killed Bear Stearns. It killed Silicon Valley Bank recently. It's resulted in the destruction of every financial institution in history. And America is not the exception. We can't just borrow money and spend it like nobody's business. Now, I do think we can grow out of this debt. I think we can inflate some of it away. The plan for a lot of people in DC is simply to inflate all of it away. And $17 trillion or $20 trillion or $34 trillion or whatever the number is, well, it's not a lot of debt if $1 trillion isn't a lot of money. That doesn't sound like a solution to me. If you just print a quadrillion-dollar bill, all of a sudden you say, well, your phone bill is going to be $1,000 this month, and an Apple is $25. And there are other countries that don't have this problem. They spend within their means. Some of them, God forbid, even save. Like I said, Singapore, Switzerland, Norway, they've figured it out. They found a way to balance their budgets and even squirrel away some money just in case. Turns out that that's not such a bad thing. So why can't we do that? And Sam Altman, who runs one of our, again, prized American institutions, OpenAI, which is just 5 or 6 years old and has built one of the most important innovations ever, something that can only be done in America. He said that AI is possibly a way out of this economic disaster that we've spent ourselves in. And I think that it's happened because people in Congress are old. They don't care. They don't care that dollar's going to have to inflate. They don't care that we might go broke because they're 80 years old. And unfortunately, a lot of us don't have any options. So a lot of my rich friends, they have Bitcoin. Bitcoin is what you want if the dollar goes broke. A lot of us don't have Bitcoin. It's too late anyway. It's so expensive now. A lot of the richer people, they can spread their millions of dollars into some Bitcoin. So if you and I, or maybe just you, don't necessarily have that ability, and we need the dollar to succeed. We need the dollar to stay in there. We need the dollar to not go broke. And I think that it is for a lot of reasons. And this happened to the Soviet Union.
Martin, totally agree. I think AI is the solution for inflation, right? It's a solution for productivity. But
Sure.
Even Sam Altman has said that he wants, some type of regulation that makes sense.
Sam Altman would love that because it benefits Sam Altman. Well, Sam benefits when Sam's regulated because Sam is the leader, and he'll make a deal with government so that he's the only one who gets to make AI. Everyone else stays behind or falls further behind. Sam's a very smart guy. He's a billionaire without OpenAI.
I understand that.
In the event of a national emergency of catastrophic proportions, the government should have the right to do what it has to do, which it always does. The government has extreme wartime power and extreme national emergency power. The one to the E-10 power, it's a number so small I can't even say it out loud, chance that AI kind of goes hectic and there's a problem, a real problem, not a fantasy, but a real problem. We should take the right action. We should have the power to take the right action. But the reality is nothing bad is going to happen from AI. It's only going to increase our productivity. It's only going to increase our success. It already has. It's an equalizer, not a divider. It makes people, the playing field more equal, not less equal. It's this wonderful thing. Tech companies, some of them, when they say they want regulation and they kick up some dust, they're not doing that because they think that's a good thing. They're doing that because it helps their bottom line. Meta has been the one company sort of telling the truth here, saying that, the right way to do AI is to do it out in the open and everyone knows what's going on, as opposed to what quote unquote OpenAI is doing. They always say that you can tell when somebody's lying when they're trying to hide something and they put something in their name that tries to convince you that there's something. Like, I'm the most tremendous person in running for Congress. Well, if you need to advocate for that, then, you probably are not. If you already are, you don't need to lie about it. OpenAI is not very open. They're, in fact, as closed as it gets. And, they're that way because it's a really great way to be rich. And they've become very, very wealthy, and they want to stay that way. And I think that the idea of open source AI scares them because everything you can do in ChatGPT, I just put out a product called Mixtral. It's somebody else's product, a company called Mistral, but I put it out as a service for a very, very low price. And it's AI almost for free, basically. And it's almost as good as
agree with you.
OpenAI. In general, letting things go as they will is the best course of action. I don't think that, for example, when we subsidized farmers in this country significantly because farming ended up being something that went through a huge decline, I don't think we helped anyone. We give a false sense of security to farmers who need reskilling. We end up costing more on farm goods, which we could have gotten cheaper elsewhere. Nobody wins. We end up costing a huge amount of tax dollars, and nobody wins. Americans are resilient. Americans will flourish through change. We adapt to change. For everything that gets destroyed by AI, 3 new things will get created. They're hard to envision, but who would ever envision this idea of a content creator? Before the internet, there was no way to do that. To be famous, you had to go to Hollywood. You had to go to DC and wait tables and pray somebody would, quote unquote, discover you. Today, you get discovered. You got the talent, you'll get discovered. I think that with AI, we can't foresee every single thing that's going to come. I've added a few of them. Maybe AI can solve our Alzheimer's problem that's going to blow up our country in expenses over the next couple of decades as we get older and older. That's just one problem. There's many others. Maybe AI will make people more productive. I think anybody that's used it knows that that's going to happen. With productivity comes economic growth. With economic growth, we get out of this deficit. So if we want to be the country that hurts AI and slows AI down, that's the country that's going to go bankrupt. If we want to be the country, and by the way, Europe's doing that. In Europe, economic growth has been flat for 10 years. Our economic growth is up 50% for 10 years. And Europe is really struggling, and they want to keep shooting themselves in the foot. A friend of mine recently said that there's a big race, that everyone's at the starting gate, and the starting gun goes off, and everyone's excited to run the race, and Europe takes a gun out and shoots themselves in the foot and says, now it's time to run. And I think that's an insane thing to do. What would happen if we...
Unless it's medical devices.
Right. What would we have done?
I hear you.
What would we have done if we tried to regulate Google and said, well, every search engine, every search request has to go through the Department of Search, DOS. I'm here from the DOS, and I'm here to tax your search. We would sit here and say, that's terrible. But they could have done that. They could have said, oh, search is dangerous. You can search how to make a bomb. You could search how to make cyanide. We got to regulate that. That's really dangerous. And thankfully, sanity prevailed. But you could have that Department of Search, DOS, and DOS agent. Sounds like a good career. We can make agencies on agencies on agencies to regulate everything in the world. But, the reality is it's not going to make us any safer. People are going to do it in the black market anyway. If you have a gaming computer right now that can play a video game, even a PlayStation or Xbox, you can run the most advanced AI stuff that is out there today. You can fake any voice. You can search for anything. You can get instructions on how to make any kind of bomb. There's nothing that's going to stop that. So the idea that we think we can stop it in DC, it's just wishful thinking. First of all, it's this reckless and feckless attitude that, oh, we're government, we're powerful, we're all powerful. No, you're not. At the end of the day, people will drink, whether you ban drinking or not, as we saw. The only people that like this, and people say this in the AI community, is Baptists and bootleggers. The Baptists want the pure holiness of saying, oh, well, we got to stop this because it's truthfully dangerous, I'm truthfully afraid. And the bootleggers are saying, oh, they're right, we got to stop this. And they're looking to fill their pockets. With regulated AI or bootleg AI, if you will. And the reality is we don't need to understand the fears of either one. The Baptists are, again, I'm not trying to disparage religion, but the Baptists in this case are AI safety people that are they're too afraid. They're afraid of nothing. They think Skynet and Terminator and all the sci-fi books are going to come to reality because we can be a little more productive. And if you've ever written a line of computer code with AI or asked AI a complicated question that Google couldn't answer, the miracle that AI is. And that it's probably not going to be Terminator anytime soon. But if you also look at the bootleggers, and I put OpenAI in this camp, I put Google in this camp, they're saying, oh, this is a terrible technology. This could end the world. There's a 1% chance it could end the world. And people gasp and say, oh, no way. And I say, yeah, it's true. That's true. In fact, you can look up a recipe to create, terrible bioterror weapon with AI. And they say, no, that's impossible. I said, yes, it's true. That means that you have to regulate us and make sure that nobody else can have access to this technology. It would be really scary. All this regulation is just nonsense. It's an ability for people to make even more money by eliminating the free market. We talked about the market for doctors, and doctors are not a free market. They're a market controlled by lobbyists and senators. And, nobody wants to hurt the doctor lobby because they'll put $10 million in your opponent's campaign. Now, the good news for me is I don't need money for campaigning because every time I sneeze, I'm in the news. So it's very easy for me to get attention.
Oh, Martin, I just had a quick question. So you've talked about cutting regulation. Do you think there's room to streamline clinical trials so that we can get drugs quicker to market?
Great question. Not really, unfortunately. The drug industry tries very hard to go as fast as it can for obvious reasons, right? So from that side, they're fighting the fight as fast as they can. The FDA doesn't really slow things down too much. You could argue that there's about a year or two of red tape that's a little, too much, but you could also argue that a little red tape in pharma is not such a bad thing to triple check, triple check these things. It's not, we're talking about drugs human beings are going to take. We want to be careful about that and study the mice and study the folks that, the animals that get very, very high doses of these medicines. And it's very sad because they're euthanized. And anytime you develop a drug, you're euthanizing several hundred animals, if not more. Very frustrating and sad, and may not even be necessary in some cases, but that is the way we do things. I think that whenever there's a way to shed a year or two off of developing a drug, they take it. And then there's people at FDA, like I mentioned Richard Pazdur earlier, who are really great people. They're medicine people first and foremost. They're not politicians. Dr. Pazdur, head of the oncology division at FDA, he zooms drugs through. If they're going to save a life, he zooms them through. You can get approval in a few months, which normally takes 12 months. So, there are people at FDA that do care about this stuff. They're people like you and me. I mean, they have friends with cancer. Some of them one day will get cancer. So ultimately, I think every shortcut that you could take has been taken, and the word shortcut in medicine is generally maybe, not a word you should be looking for. So, shortcuts lead to mistakes, and mistakes can cost a life. So we do have a methodical system that does work. And I think that's why we're the great country that we are, that we are the envy of the world when it comes to medicine. I think that the making it easier to make medicine is probably going to come from other parts of technology, including AI. The biggest question in medicine is, what do you target? What gene or protein do you target to get the disease cured? Once you know that, it's actually kind of easy to figure out the rest. But yeah, clinical trials could go faster. The regulatory reviews could go a little faster. There's always improvements, and I certainly would do my best to help them. I know Balaji was considered for FDA chairman before, and he would be somebody that would be really great to talk to about, as a friend of mine, and others, that how to cut even more red tape out of the process. But I got to say, it's fairly efficient. I think our country loses the most money and has the most inefficiency with our 2 or 3 big expenditures. Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, or the bulk of our tax dollars go to. And how to solve that is the billion-dollar question. Drugs, relatively small fries in the scheme of things. As much as I love my former industry of pharmaceuticals, it's the tail wagging the dog. We could use a new cancer drug, a new Alzheimer's drug, a couple of other things like that. But at the end of the day, and CRISPR potentially could be really, really valuable, and that could also result in miracles. But it's something that, our bigger costs and our bigger fears are much bigger than just medicine. And I think, again, I don't want to be an alarmist. There are ways to get out of this debt burden that we have, but the national debt is something that is gotten to a point where, I'm alarmed, and I have the last thing to do with DC and anything related to politics. I hate politics, and want to be so far away from it. But somebody has to stand there and say no. Somebody has to stand there and say, no, you can't spend money on this.